پر محمد وآل محمد صلوات.
پر محمد وآل محمد صلوات. شیعوں کا تھا یہ بیان، ہائے تقی ہائے ہائے. شیعوں کا تھا یہ بیان، ہائے تقی ہائے ہائے. ہائے امام زمان، ہائے تقی ہائے ہائے. شور مدینے میں ہے، روتے ہیں سب چھوٹے بڑے. شور مدینے میں ہے، روتے ہیں سب چھوٹے بڑے. ہائے شہ انس و جاں، ہائے تقی ہائے ہائے. پر محمد وآل محمد صلی اللہ. شبیہ امام زمان کھینچتے ہیں. شبیہ امام زمان کھینچتے ہیں. تصور میں تصویر جان کھینچتے ہیں. شبیہ امام کہا رو کے اکبر نے، اے درد تھم جا. کہا رو کے اکبر نے، اے درد تھم جا. کہ سینے سے بابا سنا کھینچتے ہیں. شبیہ امام اکبر نے کہا رو کر، اے درد ذرا تھم جا. بابا میرے سینے سے سنا کھینچ رہے ہیں. اے بہتے لہو رک جا، ہے واسطہ صغرا کا. بابا میرے سینے سے سنا کھینچ رہے ہیں. پٹی میرے بابا نے آنکھوں پہ نہیں باندھی، دی ہے کھلے ہاتھوں سے رن میں میری قربانی۔ اے دادا خلیلاؤ، ہے وقت قیامت کا، بابا میرے سینے سے سینہ کھینچ رہے ہیں۔ یثرب کی طرف آنکھیں ہر دم میری رہتی ہیں، اب وقت بہت کم ہے، سانسیں بھی الجھتی ہیں۔ قاصد میری صغرا کے جلدی سے ذرا آ جا، بابا میرے سینے سے سینہ کھینچ رہے ہیں۔ اکبر کی گزارش ہے، للہ نہ رد کرنا، جب آپ کا شیوا ہے دنیا کی مدد کرنا۔ بابا کی مدد کرنے آ جائیے اب دادا، بابا میرے سینے سے سینہ کھینچ رہے ہیں۔ ارمان جو دل میں ہیں دل میں ہی نہ دفنا دے، ایسا نہ ہو زینب کو جا کر کوئی بتلا دے۔ پیاری پھوپھی اماں سے برداشت نہ یہ ہوگا، بابا میرے سینے سے سینہ کھینچ رہے ہیں۔ کہتا تھا تکلم وہ ہمت جو میری ہوتی، خود اپنے ہی ہاتھوں سے میں کھینچتا یہ برچھی۔ تکلیف نہیں اپنی ہے درد مجھے اس کا، بابا میرے سینے سے سینہ کھینچ رہے ہیں۔ بر محمد وآل محمد صلی اللہ۔
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Dr. Sayyid Shabbir Kirmani, respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sir Fatiha has requested for the Salih Sawab of the marhumin listed on the screen and for all marhumin. Al-Fatiha. Man Yujibu is requested from the names listed on the screen and for all those in need here and elsewhere. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه يكشف سوء 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 أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه يكشف سوء. Ladies program. The Ladies Committee has organized a special program to celebrate the 3 Eids of Zulhajj and Shadi Milad on Friday, July 7th at 4:30 p.m. here at the Masjid. Please RSVP to Sister Batul Muki at 785-220-0015. This program is open to ladies only and dinner will be served. At this time, I would like to invite Dr. Kirmani to give tonight's lecture with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Another salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فوض أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا اللهم صل على محمد وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الإنسان ما غرك بربك الكريم صدق الله العلي العظيم زينوا مجالسكم بالصلوات على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد. My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman here in Florida, across the globe, wherever you're hearing my voice, Salamun alaikum jameen wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question, what is generosity? We're told there's a moment in time where there are some children who are playing in the street, and amongst these children there is one who is a little bit off to the side who is amongst them. And at that point in time, when this happens, we're told that the ruler of the time, he comes from the Abbasids, and he comes forward and he comes with his entourage. And when he comes with his entourage, at that point in time, all of the children disperse, all of the children run, and they all begin to flee. When they begin to do that, this ruler begins to realize there's one of these young people who is not moved, who has not run away, who has not scrambled, who has not fled the way the others have. And he says, young man, you did not leave. You did not flee. You did not run away the ways the others did. Why? He says there's only 3 possibilities here as to why I would need to flee. He says number 1 could have been that there was not enough space. That is, there wasn't enough space in the road that you could pass by and I would be in your way, or I was off to the side enough that you could have passed by. So that was not the reason. So I didn't need to move. There was not a shortage of space, number 1. He said number 2, the second possibility is that I did something wrong. I have something to be afraid of. I have something to be worried about. He says if that's the case, then one would run, but I don't have to. I have nothing to worry about. I've not done anything wrong, so I had no reason to flee for that reason. And he said the third option is that perhaps you are a zalim, you are a tyrant, and people are afraid of you. And in that case, I should not be afraid, you should be afraid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At that point in time, he understood this was not an ordinary young man. This was not an ordinary individual. He says, young man, what is your name? He says, my name is Muhammad. And he says, son of whom? He says, son of Ar-Radha. He says, this is certainly the one. He begins to speak with Zarqa. He says, he moves on from this, and then he continues. When he continues at this point in time, the narration says he goes on his hunting journey. When he goes on his hunting journey, he captures something. When he captures something, he comes back, and on his way back, he finds this same young man. And he says, young man, I have a question for you to further this. He says, what is it? He says, what is in my hand? He had closed in his fist what he had caught in his hand, or what he had brought in his hand from his hunting journey. Now, at this point in time, the young man could have just said, this is what it is, but he didn't stop there. He actually continued, and he gave the whole journey of the story before it. And he says, look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made certain of His creation. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, one of His creations is the bird. And amongst these birds, some of these birds are the fast ones that sit on the shoulders of rulers. And when they sit on the shoulders of rulers, the rulers of the time send these birds to go towards the water and to swoop down and to capture the fish from the water. And when they capture this fish from the water, they come back to their rulers, and the owners take back this bird and take from the beak of the bird some fish that this animal or this bird has just caught. And then these rulers come and they put this in their fist and they put it in front of the sons of Ali Muhammad in order to test their knowledge. At that point in time, he realized that this was certainly not an ordinary individual, and as someone who was a shrewd politician, he knew that this was a threat to his dominion that he needed to take care of. This person who used his knowledge, even at a young age, is none other than the Imam that we are here to commemorate tonight, Imam Muhammad Taqi al-Jawad, salawatullah wa salamu alayhi, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. An Imam who gave his whole life to Islam, as all the Imams did and continue to do in the terms of the Imam of our time, but also an Imam who lived a very short life, only 25 years. But in this period of time, he led some principles of life that we can learn from in order to make our lives better in a timeless way, in a timeless fashion. To that end, tonight I want to discuss a few things about the life of this Imam that can allow us to have a better quality of life in our own lives. That is, what is the verse that I recited at the beginning of the lecture, number one? And what does it have to do with this Imam? Number two, what is it that this Imam teaches us in terms of how he lived? Although in a young lifespan, not the longest, but how is it that the weight of the life of this Imam was still quite noteworthy and valuable? The next thing that I want to look at is, what is generosity, and what is some of the research in our modern world actually indicate about the benefits of this trait? How is it that it could be a paradox? And what is a paradox? And why is it important for us to reflect on this with respect to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us in terms of guidance? The final thing that I want to look at is, how did this Imam show us and lay the groundwork and the foundation for what it means to be a true Shia by adopting the traits of generosity in our life, not only in one dimension, but in multiple dimensions? And also, ultimately, how was it that this Imam left this world, and what is the tragedy of this Imam? This is inshallah what we'll look at tonight. Wherever you are, here in Florida or across the globe, from the bottom of your heart, send a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The first of all, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah 82 verse 6, He says, Ya ayyuhal insan ma gharraka bi rabbika al-kareem. Oh man, what has made you so deluded? What has seduced you away? What has deceived you away? What has diverted your attention away? Gharraka bi rabbika al-kareem. Oh man, what has swayed you away from your Kareem Lord? Rabbika al-kareem, your Kareem nurturer. Now, we sometimes just go to the surface level and we say Kareem meaning, for example, generous. Kareem also means noble. Kareem also means honorable. There's many meanings of what is Kareem. I want to share one perspective to you. In Islamic adab, this is something that's often not taught anymore, or it's something that often is not discussed anymore. Even from what I've been speaking to some of my friends, even sometimes in the houses, students aren't prioritizing this subject. Although historically it was a foundational subject, adab. Adab meaning mannerism, adab meaning ethics, adab meaning morality. Without adab, you don't have this concept of how do you deal with people, how do you treat people. And especially in a world where we're developing scientifically and technologically, without adab, you may be able to build a nuclear bomb. Without adab, you may be able to build weapons of mass destruction. But without ethics and morality, you don't know when to use it and when not to use it. You don't know if this is something that you should do. For example, if you read the history of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the devastating part was these bombs were not immediately at the same time, they were a few days apart. Meaning you would think that if immense damage has been done already, then people would learn their lesson and say, we're not going to do the second one. But no, this is what is the necessity of adab. Anyways, in adab, there are 4 levels with respect to stinginess and generosity, going across the spectrum of very stingy to very generous. And the first level is la'im, from the downside. La'im in Islamic ethics is a person who is suffering from a spiritual disease. Diseases are not always physical. Diseases can also be spiritual. So one of the spiritual diseases to be la'im. La'im is the person who, for example, they will go hungry themselves, but they'll make sure nobody gets anything. I'm going to starve and I'm going to make everyone else starve. I'm going to suffocate you and I'm going to suffocate myself and I'm going to suffocate this whole community or this whole society or this whole world. This is la'im. This is something it's a very terrible spiritual disease. Then you go to another level called bakhil. Bakhil is not as bad as la'im, but it's still pretty bad. And bakhil is the person who Allah has given them, they have something in their life, it could be knowledge, it could be wealth, it could be a lot of things, but they say that I'm going to be okay for myself, I'm going to take care of myself, but I'm not going to help anybody else. I'm not going to give anyone else. I'm not going to spread or share my knowledge or wisdom or wealth or whatever Allah has given me. So that's bakhil. After that, you get into the positive side of it, which is sakhawa. Sakhawa is generosity. Sakhawa means that I will take, for example, whatever I have in my life, if I have wealth, knowledge, whatever Allah has given me, eloquence, I keep it to myself. No, I have it and I give it. So for example, if I have a surplus and I have some surplus time, I'll volunteer my time. If I have surplus income, I'll give some of my income. Whatever it is, if I have, then I'll give. If I don't have, then I won't give. But there's a higher level, and the height is called karam. And karam is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us is one of the highest attributes. And kareem is a person who embodies karam. And karam is that instance where someone will go hungry themselves, but they'll make sure they give to others. This is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why did He enshrine the Ahlul Bayt in the Quran? We cannot separate the Ahlul Bayt from the Quran. Because when you find Surah Dahr, Surah Insan, Allah enshrined these personalities because Allah said, you want to know who is Ahdina as-Sirat al-Mustaqim, who are the ones on the right path? I'll tell you right now, Allah says. In Surah Dahr, Surah Insan, هَلْ أَتَى عَلَى الْإِنسَانِ حِينٌ مِّنَ الدَّهْرِ لَمْ يَكُنْ شَيْئًا مَذْكُورًا. Further down, وَيُطْعِمُونَ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ مِسْكِينًا وَيَتِيمًا وَعَسِيرًا. They give. Who are these people? They give out of their love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To who? To the poor, the orphan, the wayfarer. This is what Allah enshrined. And every Muslim, there's no dispute about this, agrees that this verse and this whole chapter, the only difference of opinion is it the first 18 chapters according to some Muslims? Majority of Muslims say it's all of the whole chapter, Surah Insan, is for Ahlul Bayt, for Ali, Fatima, Hassan and Hussein. There's no dispute about this whatsoever in all of the tafasirs. So Allah said, if you want to know who are my people who are on the right path, it's clear. It's Adam, it's Nuh, it's Musa, it's Isa, and it's these people who I've relayed verses about. What about the 300 verses at least, in honor of Ali ibn Abi Talib? That all Muslims, historians say, there's no doubt about what was the sha'n and nuzul of why these verses came. So this is the first level. To be Kareem, Allah says, مَا غَرَّكَ بِرَبِّكَ الْكَرِيمِ. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, verse 7, 8 onwards. He says, He fashioned you. Allah says, I fashioned you, I proportioned you, I created you. Why is Allah reminding us of this? Does Allah need us anyway? No. But Allah is saying, look, what did I not give you? I gave you everything. I created you. I gave you life. I gave you your skin, your flesh, your bones, your intellect. I gave you everything. And still you have been deluded. You have been swayed away. You have gone away from me towards some other aspects that are not as important. Fighting on this, and fighting on that, trying to do this, trying to do that. Why? Karam. First one, this is exemplified by the Ahlul Bayt. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that there are certain people, الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ فِي السَّرَّاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Those who Allah says, they give in times of good times, of bad times. They give when they have, and when they are in tough times, they also give. Referring to who? The Ahlul Bayt. الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ فِي السَّرَّاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ. In good and bad times, they give. وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ. And they control their anger. وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ. And they forgive the people. وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. If you want to know globally, anywhere across the globe, if we are on the path of Sirat al-Mustaqim, just see if we align with this verse or not. وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ. Do we control our anger? وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ. Do we forgive people? وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Do we do good to people or not? Let alone believers, that's another height, but just random individuals down the street. There's people in America who, there's one person, quiet lives. You read the lives of some Americans, it's amazing. There's people they're not Muslims. Some of them are people who are living in the middle of the Midwest, they're living in Florida, Texas, randomly. One person I was reading, he pays the electricity bill every year for 114 random people who don't have the money to be able to pay their bills, for example. And you wouldn't even know the person's name, for example. Or how many people they were custodians, they were living humble jobs, but they saved every penny they had, invested it, and when they died, they endowed this and they gave it to a university, they gave it to a library, they gave it to this. While they were alive, they had no interest in showing off their wealth, but they said that I'm going to leave a mark in society. So sometimes you don't know. This is what Allah says. Karam, to be Kareem is what is exemplified here. And as we are told, Jawad is one of the titles of this Imam who we are commemorating tonight. This Imam is one who is a blessing in and of itself. As you know, there was a test that Allah was giving His representatives. One of the tests was that his father, Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, he did not have a child until a very old age. Allah tests people in this way. Ibrahim was tested in this way as well. The narrations say that Imam al-Rida was 45 or 47 and he still had not had a child or an heir. And so people were saying Shiaism's done. They were saying there's no more Imam. This Imam doesn't have a son. But he had trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Allah gave one heir to the 8th Imam who was this Imam. That's why technically the Radawi Sadat are Taqi Sadat, by the line of this Imam. They had come through Imam al-Jawad. But as you know, if you remember previous lectures, after Imam al-Rida, the descendants of Imam al-Rida were called Ibn al-Rida. They were known as that. In any event, this is that Imam who has generosity. And it's something for us to reflect on. Why? There's a book I invite you to read. It's called The Paradox of Generosity. It's by two researchers at the University of Notre Dame. And they're researchers on sociology. Sociology is the study of society. The book that they wrote is called The Paradox of Generosity. And a paradox is something that is counterintuitive. A paradox is something that you would think that the opposite is true, but something else is true. So they say that generosity is a paradox. Generosity is a paradox? How? They said there's at least two paradoxes, if not many more. Number one, the first paradox of generosity is the more that you give generosity, the more that you give it, the more you get back in your life. This is the first thing that they say. From a scientific perspective. We haven't even gone to the Islamic perspective yet. And number two, the second paradox is based on the first one, the more you give, the better your own quality of life is, and you get more, and we'll talk about what you get more of in a moment. But they said the second paradox is stranger. If it is so beneficial, you would think that everyone would do it. If it is so beneficial, you would think everyone would embark in generosity. But the researchers said, like for example, if you know that you invest in a stock and it's going to give you 100x return as an example, so who wouldn't invest? You'd be fighting left, right, and center to try to invest in that type of investment or whatever vehicle that is of investment. But generosity has so many benefits. These researchers, Davidson and Smith, are saying that it has so many benefits, yet the people who are truly generous in our modern society are but a few. They're talking about American society. So you would think that people would be much more generous if they knew the benefits. Perhaps they don't know the benefits. So now, they said, what are the benefits? They looked at people on a number of levels, and they asked people in America, how many of them, for example, how do they give financially? Do they volunteer their time? Do they do tithing, giving 10% of your income to the church, which is a historical concept? Or do you give some knowledge to people? Do you mentor people? What do you do? And they found consistently that people who are generous with their time, wealth, or other aspects of their life, whatever they have, they are, in almost every metric that they looked at, they are vastly more improved and do better than people who are not generous. For example, they have higher rates of reported happiness than those who are not generous. They have lower rates of depression than those who don't. And there's a series of onset benefits of sense of meaning. One of the biggest calamities of our world is that people say, I don't have a sense of meaning. Remember the book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And the book was extremely successful. And Dr. Frankl himself said that I'm really alarmed and I'm not happy that this book is successful because it proves my point, that people are not having meaning in their life. And so if you want those people who become generous have immense meaning in their life compared to those who do not. This is just one dynamics of the equation. You see, if you recall, and I mentioned this in a few lectures some time ago, when we looked at the 18th and 19th and the 20th century, economics of the world skyrocketed. The GDPs of countries went to the highest levels they've ever went to, and they haven't looked back. But at the same time, people's happiness has not gone higher. People's happiness has actually diminished in many areas, in terms of mental tranquility. Why is that? And I said, and I remind you, that we've destroyed, at one side economically we may have prospered, but the other side we've paid, and we are paying in terms of climate change and the global climate. We are paying in terms of gross happiness, or unhappiness I should say. But it seems that generosity can be that tax which can perhaps help you get some happiness back in your life. But unfortunately, sometimes we don't have the opportunity to reflect on this and realize what's the benefit. Now coming to this Imam who's known as Jawad, why is it? We are told that this Imam was forced to be married to the ruler of the time, Ma'mun al-Abbasi, his daughter, al-Fadl. Now, as you know, the father of this Imam had to be the heir apparent. He was forced in that position. Similarly, this Imam was forced into this position. Now, why was he called Jawad? One of the reasons as to his being called Jawad is that he was someone who was extremely generous, as his father was, and many of the other Imams were. But it was not just generosity in this world, generosity in the next world. Why? Because one of the things that they say is, when he married al-Fadl, not only did he give the gift of marriage, but on top of that, he gave a set of du'as that he said that if you recite these, this will benefit you in the hereafter. Generosity is not only in this dunya necessarily. Generosity is also for the akhirah. That is, what do you do in this world to make a better akhirah? What do you do to elevate someone's position in the akhirah? What is it that you do to help make the world a better place here, and also ultimately there as well? As in, what do you do here to make that world better for others and go higher there? This is another aspect of the equation, and it's important for us to reflect on this. So how do you practically implement this? Maybe you've done well in your life, for example. Maybe you've learned a few things, and maybe you're up towards retirement or something like this. Maybe this is an opportunity to mentor some people, guide some people, lead them along the path. There's a lot of people who need mentorship, guidance, an understanding of the lessons that you may have learned throughout your life. But what's the point of those lessons going within in your brain to the grave? If you want to see what the Ahlul Bayt and the scholars of the Ahlul Bayt spend most of their time doing in this world, you'll find two things. One, they dedicate in terms of their time to knowledge, either writing books, or number two, humanitarian efforts of community and society development. This is how they dedicate their lives. Read the lives of the Al-Hakim family, read the lives of the scholars who have come throughout. And so it's something that's very important for us to reflect on when we look at this Imam. Now, coming to the next level, this was one dynamic of the Imam answering questions at the beginning, as I mentioned, at a young stage of his life to Ma'mun and giving those examples. But the Imam then had to face different tests. So one example is when he married into the house of al-Fadl, in the house of the Abbasids. When he married, at some point in time he began to live in a she had a certain lifestyle, and they had a particular lifestyle, and they were, for some period when they lived in the vicinity of the Abbasids, they would stay at the house of the rulership. And so one moment in time, the Imam had a servant. And when the Imam had this servant, at that point in time, when he comes to meet the Imam as a guest, he was a Shia of the Imam, he says, I wonder, in his heart he's thinking this, I wonder if this marriage into this high society, so to speak, quote unquote, has changed the Imam or not. And at that point in time, he thought this in his heart. So the Imam is sitting there and he says to the servant, the new servant who's there in the house, he says, look, can you get our guest some water? He says it, maybe the person didn't hear, no response, one time. They continue their conversation. Imam is speaking to the guest. He's like, how are you? How are things going? They're exchanging pleasantries and formalities. And at that point in time, the Imam says again, can I get some water, please, for our guest? So this person still has that question in their mind that did the Imam change? Is the Imam, maybe he's trying to keep a face or prestige or honor or status, whatever it is. They continue on their conversation. Third time, the Imam says, can we please get water for our guest? No response. Maybe they were busy, maybe they didn't hear, whatever it was. The Imam himself got up and he went towards the kitchen or wherever they had the water. He filled a cup and he came back and he gave it to his guest. And he says that you thought that perhaps this environment has changed us. But we are not those who change because of our environment. We are those who change our environments, as all the prophets did. The Imams did thus as well. And so a principle that comes forward here is, when in Rome, do as the Romans. Is that how it works in Islam? Not necessarily. There may be certain exceptions where Taqi is there and other things, but at the same time, when it comes to ethics, morality, principle, these were timeless with respect to Islam. And so when there was difficulty, the Imams did that which was right, regardless of what was the circumstance. They would always take the high moral ground. Now coming back to this, there was another moment where the Imam had to face another test, and that is, this wife of the Imam, al-Fadl, the first wife, he did not have the children from her, but eventually he did marry her. And when he married her, she used to give a lot of problems. She used to give a really tough time. She would say that, I'm accustomed to such a lifestyle and this is a simple life, and she would always try to trouble the Imam. And the Imam would be patient and patient and patient. Remember, Allah tested Asiya with Fir'aun. Allah also tested the Imam with Allah even tested the Prophet with certain challenges. And so these are tests that come in our lives. The question is, how do we deal with this? And sometimes a test is there to help us. Sometimes a test is there. I remember one of the scholars and one of the ulama, his wife, in particular in this instance, she would disrespect him in public, for example. And he was a very renowned scholar, very renowned alim. And his students were like, Agha, Sheikh, we have so much respect for you, this is not good. He says, no, don't say this is a blessing from Allah. He said, what? He said that you show so much respect to me, you, my students, and this community and society, you show so much respect to me. Allah has perhaps brought this individual in my life to humble me and to show me my reality. So she picks out, he would say, and people saw that she was picking out certain flaws that he had. And the reality of the matter is, sometimes you need that in life. Sometimes you need to, now maybe you don't need to hear it every single day. It's probably not the best for your relationship. Maybe you should compliment one another once in a while, and this goes both ways. But what I'm saying is, sometimes you need to make sure that you know what is the ground reality. And thus, so she used to trouble the Imam, and of course the Imam needed to know humility. The Imam is the Imam, of course. But there was this test that was in his life. So eventually, whenever they would go back home, so back to the in-laws, the Imam would stay there, and then she would always complain and complain and complain. And so one day, the narrations say, the Ma'mun himself is drunk, and in a state of drunkenness, in the middle of the night, he grabs his sword and he goes towards the chamber where the Imam is sleeping. And when he enters into the chamber, he begins to strike the Imam. And in a state of drunkenness, as was common for these people, he went back to his bed, and when he went back to sleep, he woke up in the morning in a state of fear and anxiety and worry. He said, what's going on right now? Did I really do what was this a dream? What happened? Because he said that I know that I got up out of my bed, and then I went to the chamber and I went and struck this individual. So he sent his servant. He said, go and check on Muhammad ibn Ali Radha. He said, go check. He said he checked on him, knocked on the door, Salamu alaikum wa alaikum salam. He entered in the door. He said, he said he was totally fine. There was no issues. He came back to Ma'mun. He said, he's totally fine. There's not a single mark or a scratch on him. I said, really? Wow. He said, summon him. So the Imam came, and he said that last night I saw a terrible dream. I don't know if I was awake or it was such a vivid dream that it seemed like it was real right now. He said, it was as if I had gotten up out of my bed and I had taken my sword and I had gone to your room and I had attacked you and killed you and tried to kill you. He said, this was not a dream. The Imam says, no, this was not a dream. This is reality. This is exactly what happened. You did this. He said, then what happened? There's no mark on you. He said, yes, this is due to an amulet. This is due to a dua. This is due to a ta'weez called, which we now call Harz al-Jawad, which at that time was not in the form that you see today, very typically in the form of a ring, although that may be good as well, ring with a star on it, which is very common, which is alhamdulillah blessed. But at that time it was an amulet that was around the arm. You may know this custom that historically, that sometimes they have Imam Izaman, and these are customs that were there during the 8th and the 9th Imam's time. So if someone asks, is this just rituals and this is just customs and has no religious basis? There is a religious basis for why these ta'weez were there, the right ones from the line of the Ahlul Bayt, for protection when someone travels, when someone goes further. And he says, this is with a dua from our grandmother Fatima al-Zahra that has been able to protect us from your viciousness and your evil. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Therefore, as we draw to a conclusion here, what we need to learn from this Imam is whatever Allah has given you in terms of your capacity, use that to make the world a better place. It could be your knowledge, your athletics, whatever gift. Allah has given everyone a gift. Now, you may not know entirely what your gift is, or you may have several gifts. But those gifts need to be shared with the world too. And you will find in giving, you will receive. The reality is, there's something that you know up here. There is something that you know that you are able to articulate with your tongue. You know, the idea of generosity of Allah, this is a trait of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we embody this, we are actually trying to reflect divine attributes, divine traits. The same way that when parents look after a child, they are adopting the generosity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When Allah, before we even knew who our mothers were, when we were in the womb of our mothers, Allah showed His generosity by covering us in layers of protection. Allah showed His generosity, that He made sure that we were protected and we got food and sustenance and rizq. So who is it that we are to withhold that? In fact, that was the philosophy of Islamic charity, whether zakat or khums or otherwise. The idea was that whenever there is accumulation of something, and if it's in excess, and there's a lot of economic discussions on this, you can read Adam Smith and some others who have said that if there is accumulation, wealth only benefits when it circulates. It doesn't benefit when it accrues and sits idle. And the reality of the matter is, it's like manure, as some have called it. Manure, when it piles up, it smells. It doesn't smell really great. But when it circulates and it actually goes on the land and actually spreads, it may have some benefit for society. Similarly, wealth that accumulates may have been on the backs of injustice. It may have been on the backs of stealing from people in terms of systematic ways. That's why the Marxist capitalist revolution happened in the 20th century and the 19th century, because people were saying the capitalists build on the backs of laborers. They steal away all of their elements of what they did. Now, granted, Islam has elements of both, and that's a conversation for the other day. But zakat, khums, all of these things were to purify your wealth. To say that, no, this is not something that I'm doing as a favor to society. Rather, this is actually how I am cleansing my wealth. And that's really what sometimes we're missing in our modern society. We turn our hearts to the tragedy of this Imam. Eventually, the complaints got so stiff and so high that al-Fadl, she wanted that this Imam is no longer, and they used this advantage, the Abbasids, Mamun, to take advantage of this situation, and they began to make the plan to poison Imam Taqi al-Jawad, this young Imam who was but in his 20s, this Imam who dedicated his life to do whatever he could within his capacity, within that time and environment, to protect Shia Shiaism and move it forward. He's the one who passed on the mantle to his son, Imam Ali al-Naqi. This Imam, Taqi al-Jawad, when he was given the poison began to mix into the blood of Imam al-Jawad. The blood then began to be infused with this poison, and the poison began to do what it was going to do, and it began to impact the Imam. The Imam became ill. The Imam's holy soul began to depart from this world. At that point in time, the Imam was given his ghusl. The Imam was given his kafan. It was a great tragedy and a great calamity for the Ahlul Bayt who had to go through this difficult trial. But this same Imam, as all the other Imams, they recalled perhaps Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam in his final moments. Perhaps they remembered Imam Sajjad, who had to deal with a situation where he asked the butchers in Medina, "Oh butchers of Medina, have you given water to these animals? Have you made sure there was no other animal looking when you are slaughtering them? And did you make sure that they were fed?" They said, "Bala ibn Rasulillah, we have made all of those accommodations." The Imam turns toward Karbala and he says, "Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdillah." He says, "Salams on you, my father." They look after the animals' rights, but what about your rights? What about your position? Azadaro do jumle, ajrukum alallah. Imam zamana ko ताज़ियत दीजिएगा, इमाम ज़माना को पुरसा दीजिएगा, और सारे इमामों को, इमाम अली उन-नक़ी, आपने गुस्ल और कफन दिया अपने बाबा को, मगर पूछिए सैयद सज्जाद के दिल से, पूछिए ज़ैनब कुबरा के दिल से कि हुसैन इब्न अली ये खाक करबला पर हैं, और 11 मुहर्रम को लुटा हुआ काफिला आगे बढ़ रहा है। इमाम सज्जाद देख रहे हैं बाबा का लाशा और कोई गुस्ल कफन न दे सके। 3 दिन बाद, 3 दिन का इंतजार, क़यामत का इंतजार। अला लानतुल्लाहि अलल क़ौमिज़ ज़ालिमीन व सयअलमुल लज़ीना ज़लमू अय्य मुनक़लिबिन यन्क़लिबून। इन्ना लिल्लाहि व इन्ना इलैहि राजिऊन। सल्लल्लाहु अलैका या रसूलल्लाह, सल्लल्लाहु अलैका या अमीरल मुमिनीन, सल्लल्लाहु अलैकी या फ़ातिमतुज़ ज़हरा सय्यदतुन निसाइल आलमीन, सल्लल्लाहु अलैका या हसनल मुज्तबा, अस्सलामु अलल हुसैन व अला अली इब्नुल हुसैन وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Ya Allah, we ask you to accept this ibadah. Ya Allah, allow us to learn from the life of Imam Taqi al-Jawad. Ya Allah, allow us to be generous in terms of our wealth, our health, our happiness. Ya Allah, allow us to be generous with our words. Allow us to be generous to our loved ones, to show compassion, to show appreciation, to show care and love and consideration for all those who we love, for our family members, for our friends. Ya Allah, increase our brotherhood and sisterhood amongst us in our community. Ya Allah, alleviate the ills of the difficulties of spirituality and spiritual diseases that we may be facing. And Ya Allah, hasten the reappearance of Imam Sahib al-Asr wa Zaman and allow us to be amongst his companions when he returns. A final request to please recite the Surah Al-Fatiha for your marhameen, for our marhameen, and for all those who do not have someone to recite Al-Fatiha for them in this night. Surah Al-Mubarak Al-Fatiha ma'as salawat. Bismillah. Hussein. Yeah, say.
कहते थे रो रो न की बाबा मोहम्मद तकी, कहते थे रो न की बाबा मोहम्मद तकी, क्या गज़ब हो गया बाबा मोहम्मद तकी, कहते थे रो न की बाबा मोहम्मद तकी, क्या गज़ब हो गया बाबा मोहम्मद तकी। कैसा सफ़र ये हुआ जिससे जुदाई हुई, कैसा सफ़र ये हुआ जिससे जुदाई हुई, راہی جنت ہوں یہ بابا محمد تقی، کہتے تھے رو رو نہ کی بابا محمد تقی، کہتے تھے رو رو نہ کی بابا محمد تقی، کیا غضب ہو گیا بابا محمد تقی، رو نہ کیوں کربلا تم سے جدائی ہوئی، رویوں نہ کیوں کربلا تم سے جدائی ہوئی، آہ میں اج لٹ گیا بابا محمد تقی، کہتے تھے رو رو نہ کی بابا محمد تقی، کہتے تھے رو رو نہ کی بابا محمد تقی، کیا غضب ہو گیا بابا محمد تقی، رویا کروں گا صدا جب تک ہے یہ زندگی، رویا کروں گا صدا جب تک ہے یہ زندگی، ہو گئی قیامت بپا بابا محمد تقی، کہتے تھے رو رو نہ کی بابا محمد تقی، کہتے تھے رو رو نہ کی بابا محمد تقی، کیا غضب ہو گیا بابا محمد تقی، کیا کہوں بابا بلا روتی ہے مادر کھری، کیا کہوں بابا بلا روتی ہے مادر کھری، پیٹتی ہے اپنا سر بابا محمد تقی، کہتے تھے رو رو نہ کی بابا محمد تقی، کہتے تھے رو رو نہ کی بابا محمد تقی، کیا غضب ہو گیا بابا محمد تقی، جی کے کروں کیا بلا آپ کا سایہ نہیں، جی کے کروں کیا بلا آپ کا سایہ نہیں، دم میرا ہے چھوٹتا بابا محمد تقی، کہتے تھے رو رو نہ کی بابا محمد تقی، کہتے تھے رو رو نہ کی بابا محمد تقی، کیا غضب ہو گیا بابا محمد تقی، زہر سے مارا مجھے فاطمہ بے چین ہوئی، زہر سے مارا تمہیں فاطمہ بے چین ہوئی، سوئے جنا چل بسے بابا محمد تقی، کہتے تھے رو رو نہ کی بابا محمد تقی، کہتے تھے رو رو نہ کی بابا محمد تقی، کیا غضب ہو گیا بابا محمد تقی، نادے علی علی یا علی، 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 بادشاہ جن و بشر یا علی، نادے علی علی یا علی، نادے علی علی یا علی، نادے علی یا علی، صاحب شمع دو سر یا علی، نادے علی علی یا علی، نادے علی علی یا علی، نادے علی علی یا علی، آپ کا فرزند حسین غریب، نادے علی علی یا علی، نادے علی علی یا علی، نادے علی علی یا علی، سورۃ الفاتحہ۔
السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى، السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين، خصوصا سيدي ومولاي أبي الفضل العباس بن أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا تسة المعصومين من ذرية الحسين ورحمة الله وبركاته، السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء، السلام عليك يا معين الضعفاء والفقراء، السلام عليك يا شمس الشموس وأنيس النفوس أيها المدفون بأرض طوس، الراضي بالقدر والقضاء ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا صاحب الأس والزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله مخرجك وزهورك ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك توعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.